Going up nicely. We just wait a minute or two, see, and then we can make a start. Okay, right, I think let's go. So welcome everyone to the second Pearson Business Book Club. Each month we choose a Pearson business or personal development book and we invite the author to discuss it. So I'm really excited that we've got Richard Newton here today. We're also going to have a masterclass from him on a key concept from the book. This is how to set up as a freelancer. So as you can see, our book this month is the Freelance Consultant. I'll put a slide together just to sort of outline some bits about the book. And if you haven't got a copy yet, you can download a sample chapter of the book from the book club webpage. And we'll also post the discount code in the chat so you can get 25% off at pearson.com. We also want you to use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask questions, and then we'll get Richard to answer these at the end. So, fire away. So, Richard, I'll just explain a bit about you. So you are a very experienced independent consultant, award-winning author, and an engaging speaker. We're going to see that in a minute. You've worked in 14 countries and across a wide range of industries. You also won the Chartered Management Institute Management Book of the Year Award in 2012, 2013 for the management book. So excellent, Matt.
Feels like a long time ago now.
It does, doesn't it? So welcome, Richard. I'm so pleased you could be here. And I was just doing my numbers, and how many Pearson books have you written?
Well, okay, so there's a slight depends what you call a book, because there's some ebooks only, which let me part those. I think it's about it's about 10 Pearson books.
Crikey, I can list them. Maybe we'll pop them in the chat at the end. Otherwise, people just hear me droning on and on. But yeah, some really great books, and they're always the good sellers for us. So we'll just start off the book club where I'm going to ask Richard some questions. And so for the Freelance Consultant, can you sort of tell us a bit more about why you wanted to write the book?
Yeah, I can, Eloise. I mean, for me, books always start with some kind of observation. And this one, it was really simple. There were lots of freelancers out there who in my judgment, were doing really well. And there's a big chunk of freelancers who I think were struggling. And I just wanted to sort, okay, so there's a bit of a gap there. What's the difference between the ones who are doing really well and the ones who aren't doing so well? And, can those be packaged up into a list of lessons and tips from the very varied world of freelancing? So that was the trigger, really.
And I know a lot of people, when the pandemic happened, sometimes their circumstances changed, and I know that sort of going freelance sort of happened a lot more in that instance.
Yeah, it certainly did. I mean, I think the pandemic actually, ironically, was quite good for certain streams of freelancers, in the sense that a lot of us, you know, value the independent thing, and it made it a little bit easier. Now, it's not true for everybody, to be fair. There'll be some people going, no, 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 you're wrong. But for some people, it actually made life a little bit easier as a freelancer.
And was there anything that surprised you about writing the book? Because obviously you know the subject really well, you're an expert in it, but yeah, does anything sort of come up that was, you know, different?
I mean, I think there are always things that come up that are different when you do your research. You go into a book with opinions, and then I think the things that stood out were, one, just quite how varied the world of freelancing is, and particularly how varied people's aspirations and desires and what they want from freelancing. And, you know, I'll talk about that a bit later, but there's this whole thing about, you're an independent, you can decide what you want to do. And I was quite surprised at to what length some people have taken that, in a most positive way, to be honest. Yeah.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing a bit more on that. And finally, how do you want readers to sort of feel when they're reading your book? What kind of emotion do you want them to go away with?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think when they've finished it, I really like people to feel confident. You know, that's what I want people to take from a book, in sense, here's some practical advice, and I really try to geek to practical stuff that, you know, there should be a good intellectual basis underneath it, but practical stuff, and people feel confident that, I think often when people jump into freelancing, there's this, oh my God, step from, I potentially say, let's come from a job into freelancing. It all seems terrifying. And I just want to make people feel, you know what, it's not quite as difficult or as frightening as you might initially think. So that if people come away feeling a bit calm and a bit confident, that's a win for me.
Yeah, that sounds like a great ambition, and yeah, to make the sort of scary and unknown more doable and achievable.
Yeah.
That's super. Well, I'm going to hand over to you, Richard, for you to take it away for our little masterclass.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Eloise. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Obviously, I'm Richard. Look, I'm not going to tell you much about me other than I am a freelancer. I've been a freelancer for about 20 years, and I'm a freelancer in two ways. I'm a freelance writer and author, and I'm also a freelance consultant, an independent consultant. Those things I've been doing for a long time, and actually it's been fabulous. If you want me to be completely honest, I'm not saying every day has been great. It's had its moments when I probably wouldn't have said that, but if I balance across that, I would never have chosen anything now but freelancing. It's been really good for me. I'm just starting a third level freelancing business where I'm sort of getting more into sort of mentoring people as well. So I hope I'm talking from experience, although I've got a reasonable amount of research into other people's freelance experience as well. So if you want to know more about me, the best places to look is on LinkedIn, and feel free to have a read. And if it sounds interesting, by all means, connect to me. So when I wrote the book, I spoke to lots of other freelancers, and I was particularly lucky to get 13 people whose actually their stories are in the book. So it's not just about me. There's 13 people giving their advice and their tips as well. And I think the thing that stood out, and I mentioned this when I was chatting to Eloise a second ago, was they're really varied stories. They're really varied. And I think one of the great things about freelancing is it is an incredibly varied profession. You know, it's really varied. And anyone who tells you there is one way to do freelancing and one way only hasn't really looked at the spectrum of people out there. So what I wanted to do today is pretty much take some themes from the book. Obviously, there's a limited amount of time, and say, look, these are some things I've observed, people who've got really good at freelancing, really successful. And one of the things I want to do is define what success means, because I think that changes as well, and say, so this is what freelancing is. Okay, so I'm going to talk about three things, basically. I'm going to do a little intro into say, so what's the basic requirement to become a freelancer? I then want to talk about, because this talk is titled Setting Up as a Freelancer, some of the sort of, I think of small stuff, but it's stuff that gets in the way if you don't understand it, setting up. And then I want to talk about the big stuff, and that will be hopefully the majority of my time talking to you. So let me kind of start off with that. What is the basic requirement? What do you have to be able to do to become a freelancer? And the great thing about freelancing is it's really, really simple. You have to have one thing, which is you have to know how to do something that's of value to someone else. Okay, so you have to have something that somebody else appreciates. Now, things I'm going to stress about that, it doesn't need to be unique. We can worry about having unique. It really doesn't need to be unique to be a freelancer. In fact, that has some disadvantages I'll talk about later. You don't need to be the best in the world. Somebody somewhere is the best in the world at everything, but you really don't need to be the best in the world. And you don't need decades and decades of experience. Now, decades of experience can help, but sometimes it's a hindrance too. You know, I know age discrimination is not allowed, but I do know that some people look at me with my decades of experience, which is a nice way of saying old, look at me and go, oh, I think I want somebody younger. So, you know, don't think you need to be unique. Don't think you need to be the best in the world. Don't think you need to have decades of experience. You just need to have some skill that is useful to somebody else. It doesn't even need to be something they wouldn't necessarily be able to do themselves. People pay for things to be done for them all the time. Now, I'm only really saying this because if you don't know anything, it is tough. And often I talk to people who are sort of fresh out of school or out of university saying, I want to get into freelance, I want my independence. And sometimes I'm got to going, well, maybe think about trying to get a year or two experience somewhere because you need to have some skill to sell. Now, having said that, I met one very enterprising school leader who said to me, I've got the knowledge. I know how young people think. And most businesses don't. And he was spot on the money, actually. Most businesses don't. But I think that idea is gone now. He's doing that. I don't know how successful he is, but I thought it was a very, very innovative way of thinking and so great thing. But you need to know something. And again, don't overestimate how much you need to know because it's also about you. So, you know, when people buy freelancers, they're buying you. And if you're the sort of person people like to work with, then they're more likely to do it. But let's assume you've got that basic thing. You've got something you think, right, there's something here I can do for other people. So what do we need to do? Well, first thing is there's a whole lot of stuff I call the small stuff. It's actually critically important, but it's not the stuff that makes or breaks your freelance career. And you can work out a lot of it as you go along. And I'm going to bundle this into the legal and admin category. I don't want to talk a lot about it because actually a lot of it's quite dull, but I do want to mention it because a lot of it is the things that are often a barrier between people becoming freelancers because they worry about it too much. If you want some examples, let me give you some examples. So one might be, under what legal status are you working as a freelancer? So are you self-employed as an example, or are you a limited company? So if you look at me, I'm actually both. As a writer, I'm self-employed. People hire me, Richard Newton, to write for them. They pay me, it goes into my bank account, and that works very simply. As a consultant, I actually work through a limited company. It's a company called Anixis. The reality is I own that company and I'm pretty much the only employee, and it's there for various reasons, one of which being my corporate clients don't hire freelancers if they're self-employed. They tend to like people through companies. So there's some things to think about there. There's all those things around tax and accounting and VAT. And if you're very numerate, you can sort that out yourself. If you're not, you're going to need some help with an accountant. And if you're a limited company, you actually have to have an accountant. And there are things like thinking about things like professional insurance. Do you need professional insurance as a freelancer? Well, it depends whether you're ever going to be sued. Most of us, the answer is no. I have to have professional insurance. I never assume I'm going to be sued, but it's just one of those things that people insist on for consultants. So I have it. As a writer, I don't. So you may need it. Equipment, do you need any equipment? It's another thing people think about. Well, the great thing about freelancing is no, you need a laptop generally and a phone. And most of us have already got those. And the great thing again about it is when you start out, any old laptop and any old phone will you do, as long as you can do your documents, your emails, and that sort of stuff, scan the web. You don't need to worry about having the slickest MacBook or a Microsoft Surface Pro or something like that. Nobody wins or loses work because they've got a nice laptop, I can tell you that. If you want one of those, wait till you've got a bit of success and then buy them to begin with. You can use something very, very basic. And the only other thing I'll mention is people worry about marketing materials. When I started out 20 years ago, there's things like business cards. I think the fact that I had business cards is a reflection of how much the world's changed. Nobody uses business cards now. And I bought some very lovely ones, which I spent some money on, and I've still got 98% of them, I think, still on my side of my desk. So to begin with, keep it really simple, because you don't need to spend money until you get going. And the other thing is, when you get going, as I'll talk in a minute, you may learn other things and want to change. So look, I'm not expecting you to remember any of this. I could go on and on listing small things, just want to stress, none of it's hard, okay? None of it is that complex, but when you start out, it can seem a bit daunting and a bit frightening, you know, VAT registration, or if I want to set up a limited company, what do I need to do? Let me just assure you, it's not complex, but you do need to do it. If you're going to be a freelancer, unlike, say, an employee, you are running your own business and you need to treat it as such. And so my advice with all this small stuff that gets in the way is to do three things. One, get a list. I'm a great believer in lists. If you've got a list of it, it really helps. And, you know, books like mine, and I'm sure there are other books out there, and you can do a web search, you can get a list. Secondly, most of us know somebody else who's a freelancer of some form. Go and talk to them. What do they do? What's their routine? When I started, I had this great experience with a friend of mine called Graham. He started about 4 years before me. He knew the ropes. So I was able to sit with him in his home office, which is a very grand title for the smallest room in the house, which, you know, has his luggage in it, and, you know, half the kids' toys are in there, but he's got a little space and a chair and his laptop. And he ran me through his routine, and that was just really good because it gave me confidence that these things aren't too hard. And the third thing, if they're not things you like doing, then you can get some help. And the great thing about freelancing is there's lots of other freelancers out there, some of whom only work with freelancers. You know, there's a world of people who never deal with corporates or businesses. They just work with other freelancers offering help. So, you know, if you want a website, then just go and get another freelancer. So quickly, I've gone through the simple stuff. Okay, it is tedious. It does need to be done, but don't sweat too much about it. I want you to feel you almost certainly can get hold of it. If you don't feel you can, there's plenty of people who will help you. So now let's get on to the meat of the conversation. I think the things that are interesting about freelancing, and I think are the big stuff, the things that will make or break your freelance career. Again, none of these are complex, but they're all worth thinking through. And I'm going to position these as 5 questions to ask yourself, 5 questions to think about, and when you go away to take with you to think about. Some of these are harder to answer than others, and some of the people in the audience, I know we've got some experienced people in, some less experienced people, and some complete starters. Some of the people here will find these easy, some others harder. If you find them hard, I actually think that's a good thing, because it means you're taking them seriously. And in a way, you know, thinking through what I think are important questions seriously is a good thing to do. But the other thing I'd say, and I'm going to stress this, and this comes back to that confidence thing, when you make the step into freelancing, it can seem like a huge step, but you're not going down a path nobody's gone down before. There are millions and millions of people who are freelancing, just in the UK, let alone worldwide. And they're people like you, they're people like me, they're people like us. And the reality is, if they've made a success of it and they're quite like you, the chances are that you can too, as long as you think things through. So don't get overly stressed about anything I'm going to say today. Now, the 5 questions I'm going to ask, and they sound like really basic, simple questions, but I think they're quite powerful and important, are this. 1, what do you want from your freelance career? 2, what are you going to do to achieve it? So what service or product are you going to sell? 3, who are you going to do it for? Who are your customers going to be? 5, how are you going to get those people? How are you going to access them? How are you going to sell and market to them? And 5, a slightly different question, how do you do it? Sort of what's your style of working and there. So let's talk each of these through one by one. Before I do that, I want to say one other thing about answering these questions, is that all plans, the best laid plans, change when faced with reality. So, you know, I'm assuming you're listening to me as someone starting out as a freelancer, and you may go away and, you know, into the darkened room or be lying in bed at night thinking about these questions, and your brain will really think them through. And your brain is great at analyzing, and I think it's important that you do think about them. But in truth, experience is the only test of whether your thinking is right. So, for example, if I ask you to think about your product or your customers, we can kind of do that in a thinking way, but it's only when we go out and find, does anybody really want to buy this? Are there actually customers for that? We know that it really works. So, and one of the things about people who are successful freelancers is most of us are a little bit opportunistic. and we're often tweaking and changing our services and our customers a little bit. And if you took me, for example, if you looked at my LinkedIn profile over the last 20 years, if you were so boring as to have my LinkedIn profile and all its different variations, you would see it's changed quite a lot. And it's changed because the products I sell and the services I've sold change, because I've learned as I go along. And I think be prepared for that. Don't go in with an absolutely fixed idea. Be prepared to change. Okay, let's talk through my 5 questions. Okay, so question one was, what do you want from your freelance career? Now, that may seem a very obvious question, but let me go through why I think this is particularly important, and particularly for freelancers. Okay, you know, one of my consistent observations about people who are successful is that they're successful on their own terms, and they're very clear about what those terms are, you know, and they have measures. They might not be formally measures, but they have a way of assessing their success, and that shapes everything they do. And as a freelancer, you're going to have lots of choices that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were in a job as such. You're going to have choices about what you do, how you do it, when you do it, where you do it, who you do it for. You know, one of the things you might be thinking, well, what basis am I going to answer those questions? And my argument is the basis you answer those questions is the choices that give you what you want from your freelance career. Now, for some of you right now, it's absolutely clear. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, you know what? I love painting, so I'm going to be a freelance artist. And that's really absolutely clear. But for most of us, it's a bit more complex than that. So somebody might say, do you know what? I want to earn as much money as possible as a freelancer. Or let's make it more complex. Again, somebody might be saying, I want to earn a minimum of £60,000 a year. I want to live in Cornwall or the west coast of Scotland or Bali or whatever it is, and do all my work remotely. And by the way, I don't want to work more than 20 hours a week. So, you know, there's different things we all want from our careers, and freelance enables us to do it. Now, there are better or worse answers to my question, what do you want from your freelance career? Or let me put that, it's not better or worse, maybe more or less realistic answers to the question. And you know, there is a thing about dreams. Dreams are great. I love having, you know, positive dreams, but dreams unfortunately don't come true just because we dream them. They have to have that kind of realistic edge to them. But one thing I can be sure about is you won't be successful, and you certainly won't be successful as a freelancer, unless you're clear what success is for you. And I really mean for you and you personally and no one else. Each of us is different. And, you know, I do know people who work only for money, have set up freelance businesses only for money. That's their key and single driver. It's not for me. It's not why I do it, but it's worked for them. They've got what they wanted, and they've chosen freelance products and services and things they do that enable that. So maybe they've become financial advisors, or, you know, they've gone into some particular area, I don't know, advising private equity people about particular software or something like that. You can imagine very specialist fields that earn money. But I also know other people who've gone into freelancing because the key driver for them is flexibility. You know, maybe they've got children at home, maybe they've got elderly relatives they need to look after, or maybe they just say to themselves, you know what, whenever the surf's up, I want to get out there on my board, whatever it is. So being clear about that and shaping what you want to do around it. And it might be like the painting example, it's just there's something you love doing, you don't want to do anything else, and the only way you can do it is freelancing. Maybe, you know, you want to be a freelance gardener, I don't know, a garden designer, so that's what you're going to do. So, you know, this to me, I think far too many people forget to shape their career around their needs and wants. And the thing about freelancing is I love it, and I know lots of other people who love it and love the independence it brings, but it does have a certain overhead in terms of, you know, I have to do all my own finances. It's not like an employee, I get my paycheck at the end of the month and the company's worried about paying my tax bill. I have to sort that out myself. And there's no point taking on that overhead unless you're going to use the real advantage of freelancing, which is to use the independence as you want. So start, key, my most important question, what is it you want from this? And then shape everything else around it. Okay. So question 2, I said, was what are you going to do? Okay, so you obviously can't just do anything, and it clearly relates to what skills you have or capabilities or knowledge, and that first question, that minimum thing you need to do to be able to be a freelancer. But nonetheless, in freelancing, there are a lot of choices and options and ways you can apply what you do. There are millions of different categories of freelancers with different skills, And those skills kind of have different levels of demand, different fee rates, different levels of flexibility around what you might do. So, as an example of that, some jobs require you to be on a desk from 9 till 5. Some freelance jobs require you to produce something in 2 weeks, and you can choose where or when you work. So, depending on that, there are different levels of flexibility. And again, that links back to what is it you want from this. Now, at the beginning, I said what you do does not have to be unique. And in fact, real uniqueness in a service, real uniqueness, novel services that no one else provides can be really exciting and interesting, but actually can be very hard to sell, because if it's something completely novel, you don't just have to sell it, you have to kind of create the customers for it because they're not out there already. Early on in my writing career, a wise editor took me to a bookshop and said, look at all the different categories of books, and said, if you're going to write a book, it has to kind of fit in one of these categories, because if it doesn't, we don't really know where to position it in the bookshop, and we don't know how to categorize it. So, and the same is true with freelancing. It has to kind of fit broadly within people's categories. Now, if you really do have something novel, it absolutely could be the route to fame and fortune. I'm not denying that. I'm just trying to tell you, it can be very hard work to start out with a completely novel service. Sometimes it works. I mean, 40 years ago, nobody hired business coaches. I mean, they weren't really known. Whereas now it's a very big and booming business. So somebody must have started that, and that person may have done very well. So if you're thinking of something very novel, I'm just telling you, it's going to be hard to get off the ground. I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just saying be aware it's hard to get going. So if I'm a very strong believer as a freelancer, your work doesn't need to be unique, but you still want it to stand out. We can be tempted to keep our services very generic. One of the traps we often fall into is thinking, well, if I'm a bit of jack of all trades, then there'll always be someone who needs help, and there'll always be someone who'll buy some of my services. And that might be true, but the reality is, all the experience shows that the most successful freelancers don't offer generic services. They offer quite specific ones, quite specific services. They have niches, So for example, they're not just copywriters. They're copywriters. I don't know, let's take something for growth software as a service firms. They're not just project managers. They are project managers who manage implementing certain types of software in certain businesses, or maybe they're project managers who help people build their own homes. And coaching, for example, they're not just coaches. They are coaches, for example, for women leaders coming back from maternity who want to go for board positions. So these are quite specific niches, and experience shows that niching is good. Generic services are not good. And you get the idea. If you're thinking of something coming into freelance very, very generic, my advice is to try and hone it down. Then maybe you experiment with a very generic service to begin with, and you hone it down when you get to learn a bit, but go for something specific. And if you want a really simple example of that, I mean, years ago, there used to be what were called a man in a van. It sounds a bit sexist now, but I suppose it rhymes, so that's why we said it. Somebody would have a van and they would say, look, I can take anything from anywhere. I've got a van, man with a van. I can assure you the person who's got a service driving a refrigerated lorry with fish from a particular fish farm in Scotland to London probably does better than the man in a van in a generic sense, even if the man in a van is always finding bits and pieces to do. So, my only message to you at the moment, niche. Think niche when you're thinking about it. Okay, got a service, so who are you going to do it for? Who are you going to offer your service to? Okay, there's no point doing anything in business or career sense if there's no customer for it. And of course, in our private lives, there's lots of things we do purely for pleasure. I'll pick one for me. I'm doing a master's in philosophy at the moment. It's just a particular thing I've got an interest in. It's got no bearing on my professional career. Well, it certainly hasn't at the moment. Maybe I'll find one, but right now I don't think it does. And I'm sure all of you have hobbies, interests, and pastimes. That's fabulous. Sometimes that can be the trigger for coming into freelancing. And there are a few people who've made their favorite pastime their career. And if you can do it, absolutely fantastic, because what's better than doing the thing you love day in, day out for your work as well? But generally, it's not quite as simple as that. And the reason it's not as simple is because there isn't necessarily a customer for it. So, when I was a child, I used to like collecting coins. And if you'd asked me as a 10-year-old, I probably said, I'll be a professional coin collector, not realizing as a 10-year-old that there isn't really a customer for that as a business. So we don't make customers generally. We go out there and find them. We go and find people with needs and wants. So your service needs to be something people are going to buy. I mean, it sounds really obvious, but I do like to stress this point because I do meet people who bemoan their freelance fate, having started some service they love, only to find that nobody else loves it. And one of the important things to always remember, I mean, this isn't really just about freelancing, it's any business, is you are not the customer. You need to remember you're not the customer. It's something you love, but your customer isn't you. Your customer is somebody else. The only person who isn't your customer is generally you yourself. So don't just do something you love unless you think there's a customer for it. And the other thing, mostly, nor are your family and friends your customer. They will generally be got good family and friends, very supportive. They're going, this is great, sounds like a great business, but what they're generally doing is being their loving family. They're not really giving you necessarily practical advice. So think about who the customer for this is. Now, if it's worried you, and I'm going to say this a lot today, just calm down a bit. For most services, especially those chosen well, there are plenty of customers. Yeah, the world population I read last week was measured at 7.1, estimated, I should say, 7.9 billion in November 2021. So let's say it's 8 billion now, and then there are companies on top of that. Now you need one customer to begin with, one customer, and there are 8 billion of them out there. The ratio sounds pretty good that you may well find one customer. So don't feel incompetent, but do think about that customer and who it is. And the thing is, although I started with what are you going to do and who's your customer, I mean, the truth is you need to answer those questions together because they interact. Oh, there isn't quite a customer for this service, so I tweak it a bit, or there's a customer for that service which is not quite the same as I'm offering, so let's go and do that instead. But when you think about your customers, think about people with 4 attributes. The 4 attributes are very simple but worth thinking through. 1, they need to be interested in your service. We've already talked about it. There needs to be somebody interested in your service. 2, they need to have money or need to be able to get hold of it. I mean, it's an unfortunate truth of life that there's no point having customers that don't make money unless you're doing some pro bono work or work for a good cause. Great. But, you know, I've met people who were trying to set up a freelance business, helping graduates get jobs, and it's great. But unfortunately, graduates without jobs tend not to have money. So unless you've got grants or something else, you need to think about that they need to have money. Thirdly, they need to be willing to spend it on your service. And I have a salutary lesson for this. Early in my writing career, I was asked by a publisher to write a book. I didn't necessarily want to write it. The publisher came to me and said, we've got a great idea and we'll pay you to write it. So I said, fine, you know, great, sounds good to me. And it's going to be a book. It's going to be quite expensive. It's going to be aimed at chief execs. And the problem was, what they didn't do is, yes, chief execs have loads of money, but chief execs generally don't buy books because they don't have the time to read them. So if they want some advice, they go and get a consultant to tell them what to do rather than read a book. So the book didn't do very well. So it's not just they need to have money, they need to have a propensity to spend it. And the final thing, possibly the most important, is those people need to be accessible to you. You need to be able to have some way of getting a route to them. So if you've got a service in mind where you think Elon Musk is your customer and, you know, you can get him through Twitter, good luck to you. Good luck to you. But generally, you know, we need to be thinking about people we've got a realistic chance of getting in contact with. I'll talk about it, but there are different routes. So let's talk about it in a second. So the thing I want to stress is getting and retaining customers is going to be one core part of your life as a freelancer onwards. Okay, you know, we're not second-hand car dealers. We're not pushing out hundreds of sales, but we're all in sales and marketing more or less. It becomes part of our life, and it needs to be part of our life. You can't just do your stuff. You need to be selling it as well. Again, I don't want to put you off because there are millions of people who do this, and don't think in terms of that stereotypical salesperson, you know, the brash, in your face. If you're that person, great. If you can get sales, great. But actually, a lot of us freelancers are relatively introspective, quiet. Quite a lot of the freelancers I know are quite introverted, yet they still manage to sell. So there are multiple ways of selling, but you have to be willing to get on that bandwagon. And if you're not, you know, maybe freelancing isn't for you because you can't just do the work. So that leads nicely into my 4th question is, how am I going to access my customers? How am I going to get hold of them? How are you going to find and sell services to your customer? Probably number 1 for freelancers generally is, how do I get customers? And we occasionally get stressed by other things like bills or whether our website looks any good, or we get enough hits, but almost always we're thinking about, where's my customer coming from? And if you're making the jump into freelancing, and I can see by some of the questions coming up, which I will get to at the end, but if some of you are well into your freelance career, but let me just focus on if you're jumping in at the first point. It's great if you can have one customer to start with before you jump. I know people who've actually, somebody has asked them to do stuff, and that's been the trigger for them getting into freelancing. It's quite nice. But if not, Then you're in the same boat as most of us. I didn't have any customers when I started. And you need to prepare yourself for the first few days. Just get ready for these first few days when, actually, funnily enough, your phone won't ring off the hook. You won't get a million emails or pings of people saying, come and do work for me. And that's not happening because there's no demand for your service. It's generally happening because people with the demand don't know about you. They don't know about you. So we need to get out there and help people know about us. And in a way, the best form of selling is not that we sell something somebody doesn't want, is that they've already got a demand and they're just looking for someone to do it. And there's lots and lots of work like that. Now, simply in finding customers, there are two routes. I mean, there are lots of routes, but let me simplify it to two. There's direct. You go out and find customers yourself. And there's indirect. You work through some intermediary. So, for example, most IT contractors work through agencies. They don't necessarily find customers themselves. They find an agency and the agency finds work for them. So there are two quite different routes, and they are very different and require different approaches. And I could speak all day about this. So I haven't got that much time, but let me say, if you look for help, most freelance help is about this, how you find work. But if you take me, for example, I use both channels. I get most of my work, truthfully, directly. Now, as a writer, it's pretty much all directly. I write for publishers. Publishers talk to me. I talk to publishers. I have a few corporate clients who want me to write about things they're interested in, things I know about, and that is all direct. When it comes to consulting, about half my work is direct. So I'm directly selling to a consulting client, but some of it comes through my network. So that's other firms, other consultancies who are kind of acting as an agent, if you like, and they're selling to clients and then saying, oh, actually, we need some help doing this. Richard, can you come and help us? So now this whole sales and marketing is a really big area. I can only really skim across it. But if you're going to go direct, the thing is it's all about visibility. It's all about getting up there, whether your visibility is on LinkedIn, whether it's on other social media, whether it's on your website. It's all about getting visibility with your customers. And so we should be thinking about how we reach out, how we build relationships, how we create awareness of what we do, all those kind of what we might think of marketing activities that lead up to a sale. If you go indirect, it's quite different because you're really about finding agencies. Now, there's not agencies for all sorts of freelance careers, but they're around for quite a lot of different things. Let me just say about agencies, because if you read things like LinkedIn, it's quite down on agencies. They aren't all good, it's actually true, and they aren't even all ethical, but there are plenty of great ones out there and really good people who will help you find work. And if that's the way to work, and as I say, that's pretty much how IT contractors find the work, the best thing is to build a relationship with an agency and help them to sell you. Give them the things they need, the tools they need, and make yourself a sellable proposition for them. So I could keep on going on about this, but let me just end on this sort of sales and marketing with three pretty high level points. So one, it's going to be an everyday part of every freelancer's life. You kind of just have to accept it. You could be the absolute best in your field, but that does not mean you'll be the most successful freelancer. The most successful ones are ones that are out there getting work. Two, though, selling takes many forms. I can't stress this often enough. If you are that brilliant in your face salesperson, wonderful, you'll probably do well, but most of us aren't. And there are much quieter, softer ways of selling. And in fact, it's not really about selling, it's about letting people know we're available to help them with the things they've got problems with. And the third thing I'll say is really the best thing about freelancing is don't think in terms of selling as a transaction. It's not like that secondhand car salesman. I sold one car, now I'm going to sell next. It's about building relationships. Because what we try to aim to do is build relationships with people who come back to us for work time and time again. And I've got clients who I've been working with for 15 years. I'm not working with them all the time, but they repeatedly come back to me for help when they've got problems. And that is ideal, because if you can get to the position where you've got a farm of clients who are constantly coming to you, actually, you've solved the problem of selling and marketing. It takes time to get there, but that's the thing. It's about relationship more than it is about that kind of transactional sale. Okay, one last question. I'm going to go quite quick through this last bit. How do you do your work? Okay, so I just want to touch on this. And I mention it not to tell you how to do it, but really to get the cogs in your brains thinking. Now, we build our businesses as freelancers and our reputations for the services we provide and for the customers we provide it to. And that's our reputation, and actually defines our niche. And they're key parts of that niche. But there is one other part that we often don't think about. And it's a part we often forget, and yet it's most fundamental to us. And that's us, ourselves, who we are, how we behave, how we develop relationships with customers, and how we interact when we deliver whatever we deliver. You know, when someone buys a freelance service, they are, of course, buying that service or product, whatever it is you sell, but they're also buying into you as a person. And there are ways of behaving and interacting that encourage people to buy again. They like working with you, yeah. And unfortunately, there are ways of behaving that kind of discourage them. And we can think that's a bit unfair, but we all do this all the time. And we think about yourselves.